The Kuiper belt held no warmth. No stars reached this far with more than a breath of light. Here, cold reigned sovereign, an ancient, absolute stillness broken only by slow drifting wrecks and the decaying whispers of forgotten satellites. Glacial fragments drifted in silence past relics of human ambition, the rusted carcasses of orbital fuel depots, the skeletal remains of colonial prospectors, the hollow shells of surveillance drones now blind and tumbling. Beyond Neptune's orbit, deep inside a carved-out dwarf planet designated only as Rehold 3, something unnatural stirred. Rehold was never meant for habitation. It was a mining claim abandoned after the Second Belt riots, another forgotten casualty of Earth's downward spiral during the resource collapse. Now it had been reborn. Not as a home, but as a crucible. The Tyrant Breaker was not birthed, it was assembled, welded, grown in rage and secrecy. Its armored hull bore no symmetry, no elegance, just necessity. Jagged, blackened, asymmetrical. But everything had a purpose. No flagship lineage. No ceremonial inlays like the Nova Accord's dreadnoughts. Just metal, wire, scars, and intent. Each plate of armor had a history. The forward prow was stripped from the collapsed orbital ring above Manila Station. Its secondary hull came from the Martian debris fields, still pockmarked by war. Dorsal fins repurposed from a failed Jovian weather array. Scorch marks lingered. Rust flaked in seams. Engineers worked in silence, often without sleep, under failing floodlights and the constant groan of an unstable mining cavern. They welded blind sometimes by instinct alone. More than 20 died. Some from decompression. Others from fusion errors. Some vanished between shifts, never logged again. The walls bore their names etched in grease, scratched in welding torch arcs. Voss had walked those halls many times, reading each name like a ledger. Inside, the ship breathed through vacuum-sealed lungs. Compressors chugged. Grav plating throbbed in uneven pulses, not faulty, but designed that way by Halim Vega to mimic planetary instability. He claimed it prevented madness. Whether it worked or not, no one questioned him. The core, called the womb, was a chamber 4 decks deep, a tangled mass of stabilizers and magnetic scaffolds cocooning a synthetic singularity no larger than a fruit. Born from an illegal experiment on Enceladus, it pulsed with caged hunger. It had devoured 2 prototypes, 1 AI, and nearly the ship itself. No record acknowledged its existence. It was a war crime waiting to happen. Yet it powered the Tyrant Breaker with a steady, malignant rhythm. Human hands had built it. Not nations. Not corporations. Exiles. Veterans. Ex-scientists and pirates and colonists too angry to die quietly. Some had given up more than their time. Elia Rames, the original fusion architect, had died screaming from internal burns. Her sealed bones rested in the conduit chamber. Every month a diode blinked for her. Just once. Just blue. Now the last stabilizers locked into place with a thunderless shudder. Drone arms withdrew. Optics aligned. System lights shifted from red to amber. Power transfer initiated. Core burn began. Systems online. In the command cradle, Commander Irina Voss stood unmoving. Her cracked visor caught the orange flicker of startup. She hadn't repaired it. That fracture, earned in blood, marked her refusal to forget. At Farside Arcology, she'd killed a Nova Accord infiltrator with her own oxygen hose. That act had lost her Earth's protection and bought her time to vanish. Consoles around her flared awake. Readouts scrolled. Holograms overlaid targeting grids and deep orbit projections. The ship's interface wasn't clean, it was layered, brutalist. Control nodes pulsed under her fingertips, old Earth standard overlays coded in stolen Accord logic. Red icons blinked at the base of the helm, waiting for her touch. The central chair turned. She ignored it. Below, through a reinforced lens, the singularity shivered. A grapefruit-sized eye of annihilation. Contained for now. She exhaled. Not for effect, not for ritual. For herself. Her ribs still ached from the last 0G fracture. A scar pulled tight at the corner of her jaw. In that moment, she allowed one thought, one tremor of doubt: if we're wrong, we'll vanish without trace. Her crew arrived. Cade Rios limped through first. He nodded once. No words. Still gaunt, still jittery. His stimport gleamed. He took his place at NAV, fingers already tapping codes into the ancient control deck. Halim Vega entered next, muttering flight tolerances. Coolant stains on his suit. Uncut hair shadowed his eyes. He paused only to tap the coolant gauge. It hissed. He smiled. That was enough. Myrev Zun stood in the doorway for several seconds. Watching Voss. Watching everything. Her Nova implants dimmed to a deep purple. Without a word, she moved to tactical and interfaced directly. No salutes. No roll call. But before Voss moved, Vega reached into his sleeve and withdrew a tarnished coin. He pressed it against the console. One by one, the others did the same. A simple act. A ritual from Redhold's first year, metal from Earth, burned and passed hand to hand until smooth. They said nothing. Voss stepped forward. Her boots rang on the steel. She pressed her palm flat to the console. Authorization confirmed. The ship responded. Engines spun. Thrusters surged. Drive cones bloomed outward in concentric rings. Heat scorched the floor. Outside, scaffolds tore free, shredded by the ship's inertial wake. Mag clamps failed in sequence. Buried antennas blinked alive. Triple encrypted pulses scattered across space. Neptune's heliopause relays captured their ghost signature. Somewhere, Crimson Deep listening probes took notice. Nova sensor webs caught a whisper. Neither understood. Not yet. Above, in Redhold's forge chamber, the Tyrant Breaker ascended. Sparks rained from ruptured seams. Ice vapor burst outward. The ship breached into vacuum with the force of a ruptured world. Within the sealed bridge, 47 humans watched the stars return. Some for the first time in years. No flag. No name. Only a marking burned into the prow. A human skull. Crowned with broken chains. For years in the making. 47 lives aboard. One warship. Now it begins. The Dreacle system had once been silent. Now it screamed. Solar flare remnants arced across the upper atmosphere, painting the cloud line in sulfuric reds and electromagnetic green. Dreacle Prime, once a fertile world seeded with Nova Accord soil weavers, now burned under an alien siege. Once lush equatorial forests lay in phosphorescent ruin, their gene-bonded root systems liquefied by atmospheric bombardment. Windstorms carried ash and trace heavy metals across the continents. Human lungs could survive here for a few minutes, no longer. Above, in low orbit, two alien superpowers clawed at each other's throats. The Crimson Dominion's warforms swarmed like a living tide, tens of thousands of exochitinous dread pods launching from their hive carriers, each seated with matron-forged thrall armies bred for ground violation and orbital neutralization. Their bioships moved like predators, hulls flexing in pulsing rhythms as if exhaling. Heat signatures bloomed across their living armor, organic reactors circulating symbiotic bloodstreams, metabolizing starlight and radiation. Gravitic fields surrounding the Dominion fleet spasmed in uneven pulses, distorting sensor fidelity. Tracking lock was nearly impossible. Their targeting arrays functioned on ferromenal analogs and psionic command chains. Few human-built systems could interpret the logic of their swarm movements except one. Opposite them, the Nova Accord's orbital formations resembled a cathedral of light and memory. Memory ships, sentient constructs housing the neural echoes of extinct species, glided in deliberate procession. Their hulls shimmered with refractive armor, not designed to deflect, but to redirect and confuse. Anti-kinetic shielding lattices, woven from resonant crystalline matrices, spun outward from the core like wings of frozen glass. Each ship's AI carried millennia of post-organic philosophy. They fought without emotion, without fear. Calculations passed between them at relativistic speed, billions of simulations per second to predict energy arcs, anticipate Dominion maneuvers, and minimize the entropy of death. In between, Dreacle burned. Civilian orbital rings collapsed under crossfire. Unaffiliated mining stations caught on the wrong trade routes were shattered into silent blossoms of plasma and frozen atmosphere. Hullcom relays bled static and flame. There were no neutrals anymore, not within range of a Dominion planetary harvest. At the system's shadow boundary, unnoticed, the Tyrant Breaker slipped from void space. No FTL flare. No thermal wake. It emerged as shadow, a jagged silhouette swallowing starlight, masked in void black hull plating designed to scatter gravitational backscatter and reflect no active signal. Its profile had been configured not to evade detection but to deny existence. Alien sensors would find nothing. Accord prediction engines wouldn't register a new actor. The Crimson psychic webs would taste only silence. Inside the bridge, tension coated every surface. Voss stood motionless at the center of the command cradle, hands clasped behind her back. Her eyes flicked across the three-dimensional battlefield projection, its cold illumination painting her features in pale light. The scale was staggering, over 600 capital-grade signatures in proximity, not counting subvessels, drone clusters, or ground support frigates. She said nothing. But beneath the stillness, her breath slowed. A fractional inhale. The kind that preceded violence. Cade Rios adjusted his shoulder brace with one hand, the other flying across the navigation console. His left eye twitched involuntarily, a leftover from stimulant feedback loops years before, but his fingers moved with absolute precision. He mapped escape vectors and slingshot turns before anyone asked. Vega's voice emerged from the lower engineering well. Grav lens alignment complete. Singularity holding. We can open a distortion corridor. 3 seconds max containment stress will hit limit margins on second stage retraction. Voss gave no reply. Zune spoke next, her voice measured and slow. Dominion firing sequences match a 16-point rhythm. If we align insertion during Nova crossfire, we bypass initial vector tracking. Predictive AI will take 8 seconds to adjust. We strike during their uncertainty window. Voss leaned over the projection and traced a line. It arced through the Dominion's outer swarm shell, pivoted across the flank of a dead memory ship, and terminated in the shadow zone beneath a debris field trailing Drekel Prime's decaying exosphere. There. Targeting? Zune responded instantly. Hive carrier Vorthoskesh. Central node. Spawning chamber is located between armor folds Alpha and Delta. Vulnerable if approached from low gravitic angle. Voss looked to Vega. Can the core hold a shear burn that long? Vega grimaced. The field won't collapse, but we'll lose 2 of the forward dampeners. Means a shot like that would be permanent. No recharge window. Voss didn't hesitate. Good. Load the coil. The tactical map dimmed. A ripple of red cascaded through the field as the Tyrant Breaker angled into attack posture. It moved. Acceleration came not with fire or roar, but a muted shudder, internal thruster rings compressing space ahead and spooling gravitational momentum. The prow aligned, drive fins unfolded, and the ship cut forward at velocities that tore silent fractures in the void. The first enemy vessel, an old Dominion picket ship, registered their presence only when rail slugs made contact. The Tyrant Breaker fired before it was seen. Each slug was the size of a monorail car, sheathed in magnetic armor and accelerated by gravitic fields rather than chemical discharge. They hit like orbital strikes. The picket ship's biological hull splintered open, spewing luminous ichor and molten bone. Within moments, alarms bloomed across every active sensor grid in the battlespace. Nova AI nodes flickered. Dominion Hive thought pulsed in alarm. Something was wrong. Human signatures didn't belong here. Voss issued the first command. Execute sheath cascade. The ship responded. Underside plating peeled back in synchrony. Dozens of launch cells activated. Short-range coil missiles primed with microwarp cores fired in interlocked spirals, exploding in concentric patterning designed to confuse sensor arrays. Pulse cannons ignited, targeting Dominion bioships with precision flares designed to rupture their external neural relays. But these were distractions. In the core, the gravitic beam system came online. Built around a micro-singularity forced into harmonic oscillation, the weapon projected a directional shear, an invisible compression field that didn't burn, didn't explode. It collapsed. The beam sliced through a Matron-class carrier. For 3 full seconds, nothing happened. Then the ship buckled inward, hull crumpling, organic screams cut short as biomass compacted into itself. Secondary vessels nearby shattered under stress recoil. A Dominion matron's shriek pierced across the psychic bands, an ululating scream felt in the marrow more than heard. Then silence. Absolute. Kate grunted. Target neutralized. Zune shook her head. Not the node. Vorthoskesh still ahead. The Tyrant Breaker dove. Debris filled the orbital corridor. Melted fragments of Nova drones drifted alongside fractured Dominion exopods. The wreckage formed a tunnel of death, a corridor carved by mutual destruction. Inside it, the breaker moved like a predator, scanning, analyzing, weaving through with impossible precision. Zune ran another scan. Node carrier within range. 5 clicks. Gestation chamber exposed. Defenses regenerating. Voss glanced at the viewport. Her hand tensed at her side. For a moment, only one thought passed behind her eyes. If this fails, the galaxy forgets us as smoke. Open the womb. Vega flinched. That close, the beam will deform the rail. We'll lose containment feedback. Then replace it when we're done. In the chamber below, the singularity's cage split. A lance of gravitational death extended from the breaker's prow. The Dominion's largest hive carrier, Vorthoskesh, opened its maw in a reflexive attempt to deploy spawn. It didn't matter. The beam cut it open like meat. From bow to stern, through exo-hardened armor and gestation organs, the carrier was split. The chamber housing the matron burst in a wave of seared fluid and ruptured flesh. Bioreactors within detonated in sympathetic collapse. For several seconds, no one on the bridge moved. Through the external feed, the void burned white. Then red. Then silence. Even the Dominion psychic field was quiet. Above the planet, Nova Accord memory ships paused. One rotated slowly, projecting a calculation grid into open space, a gesture not of threat but of reassessment. Even a machine could express caution. Voss didn't wait. Disengage. Spin us out. Kate initiated evasive spirals. The ship's mass vector destabilizes activated. With a burn of exotic particles and a snap of spatial geometry, the Tyrant Breaker vanished. It left no trail, no beacon, only the echo of an impossible weapon and the shattered remains of two superpowers' pride. Drekel Prime burned, but the siege was broken, and the galaxy had taken its first real breath of fear. 4 hours after Drekel Prime fell silent, the Tyrant Breaker emerged from distortion space beneath the shrouded orbit of an ice-locked moon. No formal name was registered in human archives. The Dominion had no need for language. Accord maps had labeled it Rocrypsis, a placeholder designation from a century-old Nova Scout probe. The crew spoke little. Scorch damage still glowed along the starboard ventral plates, and the forward rail was fused into slag, its alignment rings warped from the last gravitic discharge. Smoke lingered in the lower decks. The air scrubbers worked twice their cycle, straining against the chemical fallout of combat heat and decompression stress. Subdeck 3 had been sealed after a coolant line ruptured. No one volunteered to check it. Inside the command cradle, Voss reviewed the mission data, one line at a time. There was no celebration. The destruction of Vorthas Kesh had been clean. The data confirmed 97% detonation yield across the matron's primary incubation organs. But even in death, the hive had infected. Dominion relay spores had scattered prior to collapse, broadcasting partial memory strains of the attack. Within hours, half a dozen matrons across the Crimson border had synchronized their brood activity. Hive logic didn't forget. It replicated. A response was coming. Voss knew there was no retreat. Below the ice moon's surface, an ancient Dominion structure slept beneath kilometers of frozen ocean, classified in old Accord records as Biotemple 0737 Phi. It was not a station. It was not a city. It was a womb. One of the original Crimson birthing chambers, subsurface, geothermal fed, shielded from orbital scans by natural silicates and planetary tidal resonance. Accord tactical algorithms had rated it a class-red biosite, catastrophic if breached, uncontrollable if left intact. The Accord had documented it and marked it for future cleansing. But they never returned. The temple was still active. Myrev Zun had verified the signal traces herself. Data stolen from Nova archives confirmed it. Increased biosignal emissions, accelerated metabolic spikes in deep core life mass, and anomalous surge of neural echo traffic on dead Accord telemetry bands. The structure was waking. Another generation of Dominion warforms, unbound, unprogrammed, would emerge. And without a matron to control them, they would flood the system blind. Mad. Thousands of gestating creatures, fueled by instinct, radiating uncontrolled high-frequency pulses. If they reached a Dominion command ship intact or ruined, they could adapt. They could learn. The Tyrant Breaker descended. Through clouded exosphere and flares of aurora static, the warship dropped into the moon's night side. No city lights. No satellites. No orbital defenses. Only ice, stone, and movement far beneath. The temperature outside hovered near -140 Celsius. Subsurface scans flickered with faint energy returns distorted by crustal ice lensing. Still, the signal was there, a slow pulse, organic and rhythmic, resonating upward. The hangar bay opened. For drop pods, each reinforced with heat shielding, layered armor, and emergency grav cushions launched silently into the void. Inside them, Voss, Cade, Zun, and Vega. They descended in silence. The ice screamed around them. Friction built between pod skins and stratospheric sleet. Winds sliced against their hulls, laced with trace ammonia and ionized particulates. The external cams showed only static and a deepening wall of blue-white haze. Impact came hard and unceremonious. The surface cracked, then gave. The pods dropped again. They plunged through an ancient glacier channel, now hollow and steaming from geothermal vents. Vapor hissed around their landing zone. The ground was unstable, the ice layered with invasive coral-like filaments, Dominion tissue laced with stone, grown through centuries of silent expansion. Slush and blood-orange light pulsed beneath their boots. The air stank of metal and birth fluid. They emerged in full exo-armor, each suit vacuum-sealed, radiation-hardened, and pulse-charged for short-range energy discharge. Helmets locked. HUDs synced. Weapons drawn. Zun adjusted her shoulder rig, scanning the tunnel. Bioemissions are dense. Movement pattern irregular. No signal hierarchy. They're waking without a chain of command, Vega said, voice filtered through his rebreather. His fingers trembled slightly. The matron's dead. This place shouldn't function without one. It functions because it never stopped, Voss said. Her tone was flat, but her jaw clenched once. They've been growing since the last war. They moved forward. The glacier narrowed, forming an archway of translucent blue where Dominion growths pushed through the ice like bone tumors. Veins of bioluminescent tissue spiraled across the walls, pulsing with sluggish heartbeat rhythm. Frost met flesh in uneven patterns, growths forming blind nodules, some the size of lungs, some shaped like limbs. Every step triggered microresonance shifts, barely audible but present. Like sonar in a sleeping throat. Cade slowed, picking up echoing vox tones. Not ours. Old Accord scouts? Vega asked. No, Zune said. Residual hive memories. This place is repeating their deaths. Voss said nothing. They reached a descending ramp carved, or rather grown, through the ice. Downward, hundreds of meters into a central birthing chamber. The space was not engineered. It was gestated. Spiral towers of hardened tissue branched like coral through black ice. Rows of incubation sacs lined the walls, some dormant, some stirring. Echoes of hissing breath and wet muscle contractions echoed across the chamber. At the heart of it pulsed a biocore, roughly spherical, 30 meters across, partially submerged in superheated fluid. It glowed with internal movement. Shadows swam beneath its membrane. Voss raised her weapon. Set charges, she said. Zune opened her satchel. Inside, gravitic collapsers, small, dense explosives designed to trigger spatial distortions and implode biological structures. Their use was outlawed under every known galactic accord. No one questioned it now. They moved fast, placing them along load-bearing flesh columns and nutrient canal intersections. Vega paused to manually prime one under a gestation node, his hands trembling. A whisper rose from the pod beside him, like breath, but reversed. The sound of a dream inhaling. Cade froze. You hear that? Voss turned. Stay sharp. Then it began. From below the core, a sound. Not vocal. Not mechanical. A resonance deep and layered. A signal meant not for ears, but for nerves. The wall sacs pulsed. Thousands of them. They convulsed at once. Liquid sloshed. Membranes quivered. The floor heaved. From the center of the core, something breached. It rose tall, nearly 4 meters. Malformed. Armorless. Humanoid in frame, insectoid in origin. Its skin had not finished hardening. Translucent muscle shivered under exposed veins. Its mouth split vertically. It saw them. It screamed. Not in defiance. In recognition. Voss opened fire. Her grav pulse struck the thing's upper torso, shredding half of its unformed bone mass. It staggered back, but didn't fall. It pivoted toward Zune. Its scream modulated, becoming sharper, faster. A call. The sacs above ruptured. Swarms of half-born creatures fell from the walls. Some crawled. Some slithered. Some dragged malformed limbs or twitched through incomplete nerve pathways. But they all moved toward the heat. The humans. Fall back. Voss ordered. They formed a line. Pulse rifles sang in short, surgical bursts. Biomass burst, slumped, reformed. Some of the newborns shrieked mid-collapse. Others reared up on backward limbs and charged. Zune activated a shock ring. The corridor behind them collapsed, blocking retreat but halting the swarm. For now. Charges primed, Vega said. 3 minutes. The chamber screamed again. Another figure emerged from the core, larger, armored. Born of panic, not protocol. This one bore weapons fused to its arms, spike lobes and lashing cables. It fired without hesitation. A bolt struck Vega, spinning him backward into a wall. His suit held. Barely. He gasped, pain sharp in his side. Voss pulled him clear, her own breath ragged from exertion. Cade lobbed a grav mine toward the fluid trench. The collapse was instant. A dozen birthing nodes imploded inward, their fluid vents shattered. Screams echoed from the walls, high and wet and wrong. 2 minutes. Zune shouted. Creatures surged through the half-collapsed tower bones, falling on all fours, shrieking and clicking. A low pulse flickered through the air, hive static, confused. Searching. Voss stood at the center of it all, blood on her armor, heat warnings flashing across her HUD. She triggered the uplink. Above, the Tyrant Breaker received the signal. In its cradle of void and silence, Bellum woke. Sensors aligned. Targeting reticles cascaded across kilometers of rock and biosignature fog. The ship acknowledged. Not with words, but with focus. It fired. Molten impact drove through 5 kilometers of crust. The temple cracked. Fire met flesh. Ice collapsed. Heat surged. The ocean boiled. Below, the humans ran. Creatures burned around them. Some still moved, still crawled. Others thrashed without limbs, still screaming, still reaching. Voss triggered the charges. The core collapsed inward, gravity shrieking around its own organ weight. Tissue imploded. Light vanished. Bio-memories flickered into static. Echoes died mid-thought. The last thing any of them saw was the temple folding into itself like a throat trying to swallow a scream. Then darkness. And silence. The siege of the unborn temple had ended. But none of them forgot how it began. 36 hours after the collapse of Bio-Temple 0737, Phi, the Tyrant Breaker dropped into the cold silence above the moonless gas giant Farsal. Its storm belts were the color of oxidized copper, deep red, burnt gold, and slate gray, spiraling endlessly across the surface like ancient oil spilled across a magnetic sea. Nothing lived below. Not anymore. The Nova Accord had killed the last inhabitants 3 centuries ago. Drifting in low orbit, hidden within the charged shadows of Farsala's magnetic wake, floated their legacy, a single construct, the Mirror City. It orbited not as a satellite but as a tombstone, a living archive. From the outside, the city appeared as a lattice of glass and refractive alloy. No hull. No doors. Just an unbroken sphere of mirrored layers, 5 kilometers wide, spinning on an axis misaligned with local gravity. Every surface reflected light and bent it into recursive patterns, mapping spectra invisible to biological eyes. Sensors couldn't penetrate it. Logic couldn't predict it. Nova designed philosophy held that memory was sacred but interpretation was sacrilege. Only one access vector existed. Myrev Zun stood at the base of the forward spire, helmet under her arm, her eyes narrowed at the orbital horizon. Her synthetic eye adjusted constantly, twitching across frequency bands in micro-blinks as it tried to interpret the mirrored shell. It won't be defended, she said. But it won't be passive. Voss didn't look at her. We're not here to challenge it. Just retrieve the shard. Zun's jaw tightened. The shard is not stored, she replied. It's experienced. Vega was already configuring the interface scaffold in silence, linking portable life support to the injection cradle. Transparent cables looped across the command spire floor, pulsating with low-frequency charge as neural alignment readouts scrolled across the outer walls. He didn't speak as he worked. He hadn't slept since the temple. Cade muttered under his breath, pacing tight arcs between the navigation array and the external feed loop. His fingers danced across microcontrols, eyes darting between magnetic field overlays and the neural feedback coils that hadn't been touched since the ship's dry dock days in Redhold's outer ring. The Mirror City contained no computers. No core. It was the system. It lived on resonance, memory encoded in harmonic fiber strung across quantum-sheared architecture. Like an organ, it responded to pressure and silence, not commands. There was no interface. There was only the willingness to drown. The shard they sought was not a file or a key. It was a recorded memory, an imprint of the Accord's last classified encounter with the Crimson Matrons. Buried not in data but in consciousness. Extracting it required exposure. Total. Only one crew member could interface. Zun removed her outer armor layer. Her chest plate hissed as the organic seals separated. Beneath, her spine ports were already exposed, old Nova implants humming faintly under her skin. She winced as Vega slid the neural stabilizer into place. 3 minutes exposure, he said. Any longer and the brain will treat the signal cascade as a real past. It already is, Zun murmured. The others said nothing. The launch tether fired her capsule across vacuum. There was no ceremony. No countdown. The Tyrant Breaker held position, power dampened, weapons offline, systems low. Even Bellum had gone quiet. The ship behaved not as a war vessel but as a penitent and executioner pausing before an open grave. Zun reached the shell in 16 seconds. There was no breach. No impact. She entered. And the world inverted. Her senses didn't translate. They were rewritten. Light bent backward. Time staggered. Memory overwrote presence. Gravity twisted into taste. Her skin became language. Her thoughts spoke back at her. She fell into the archive. The mirror accepted her not as a visitor but as a variable. Thousands of lives surged past her, a planet's birth seen from orbit, a sun's death swallowed in joy, the extinguishing of 1,000 orphan languages. She felt herself fracture, felt her Nova past and her human present blur at the bone. She remembered a corridor of flame on Drekel Prime, a hive collapsed by force, its core crushed by graviton shear. That carnage had not ended the war. It had triggered something older. The archive offered more. Dying planets, failed packs, obsidian ships breaking under solar pressure, the Accord's attempt to uplift the Keshna only to be betrayed during the Fifth Synthesis War. She saw trial courts of lightspeak judges. She saw her own face rendered in pre-failure code. She was a child in a field of logic blooms. She was an engineer welding memory bark to a data spine. She was a ghost. But this wasn't memory. It was function. It responded to her presence with structure. She didn't read Nova code, she became its consequence. Logic blooms unfolded in her path, rearranging syntax across every vector of attention. She glimpsed the matron siege of Pharsalus' sixth moon. She stood on a bridge of bioluminescent stone as crimson swarm barges descended through a sea of clouds, carving through the Accord's last atmospheric bastion. The Accord ships did not fight. They downloaded. Data streamed in the sky like auroras, feeding into mirrored pylons. And there, in the folds of a failed treaty, she found it. A crimson gene code signature, buried in NovaScript, hidden inside a synthetic seed line, wrapped in the quantum logic of a political surrender. A matron, not yet born, not dead, preserved, designed by the Accord. The file wasn't a mistake. It was a weapon, a genetic contingency engineered by the Nova Accord and implanted into a false Dominion vessel during peace negotiations over a forgotten moon. Insurance, or genocide. The project had failed or been abandoned. The Accord had left the sector before it grew. But the signature had survived. It was waking now. Zune screamed. Inside the mirror, her identity began to unravel. The memory fought back, trying to root itself. Her human half recoiled, but the Nova algorithms tried to complete the thought. Two halves at war, splitting along lines she couldn't see. I am function. I am fracture. I am unfinished. She clawed her way out, thoughts trailing behind her like torn fibers. The capsule slammed back into docking clamps. Vega was waiting with stabilizer foam and injection needles. Kate dragged open the seal as steam hissed into the bridge. Blood ran from her nose, ears, and one eye. Her limbs jerked once, then stopped. She didn't speak for a full minute. Voss waited. She hadn't moved from the command rail, but one hand clenched the railing a little tighter. Vega looked down, unable to meet Zune's eyes. Kate's mouth opened, then shut. No one spoke. Zune's voice came hoarse. They built her. They lost her. And now she's waking up on the Dominion's edge. Voss stepped back, expression unreadable. Coordinates. Zune lifted her trembling hand and uploaded them. The screen lit red. The location was inside the Crimson border, deep. Remote. A system left unscanned since the last Crimson Accord détente. Long-range probes marked it as uninhabitable. That data was wrong. Something was there. It wasn't over. It hadn't even started. 8 days after the mirror, the Tyrant Breaker hovered beneath the ecliptic plane of the Telvath Rift, an interstellar fracture at the edge of Crimson Dominion space, where gravitational tides twisted light into false constellations. Each distortion echoed a failure of ancient stability. Shadows of forgotten stars bent backward across time. Here, the Dominion reigned without contest. No Accord signal dared penetrate the rift's outer envelope. No human ship had passed this way in centuries. Every hour, new signals passed overhead. High-form relays, migratory broodships, spore broadcasts trailing atonal pulses. But none detected them. Bellum had reconfigured the ship's signature, folding its identity beneath a Dominion corpse's thermal residue, mimicking the dying scream of a matron-class pod. To sensors above, the Tyrant Breaker read as decay. No threat. No voice. Voss stood alone at the prow, watching space contort. Beneath her, the forward hull's observational glass displayed the rift in slow, unnatural motion. Gas tides thick with bioelectric charge, pockets of reactive plasma igniting along invisible seams, felt more like an autopsy than a journey, as if the galaxy had been opened and they stood at its scar. She said nothing, but her hands remained clenched behind her back far longer than necessary. Every breath came slow, deliberate. The mirror had shown them a lie at the root of the war. This mission was no longer about vengeance. It was about denial, killing a future before it could inherit a voice. Inside the war room, Zune's coordinates pulsed in low amber light, projected across a three-dimensional stellar ghost. The system was unnamed. No colonization record. No Nova mention. But it existed. An island of silence inside an empire of screams. The matron embryo lay there, or had grown into something worse. Cade leaned over the projection table, skin pallid from sleepless nights, sweat condensing beneath his neck brace. There's no approach vector that doesn't light us up like a funeral torch. Deep scan arrays pulse in 4-minute cycles. They'll see us 3 jumps out. Unless they're looking the wrong way, Zune replied. Her voice carried less certainty than usual. Vega stood silent. His hands trembled slightly over a med-screen, rechecking biosigns from Zune's mirror descent. He hadn't mentioned the neural scar tissue blooming behind her left eye socket. Not yet. No entry was possible through stealth. Not through speed. Not through force. So they chose a different weapon. Negotiation. An envoy waited at the edge of the rift. A crimson caste effector called Alseth, an ancient bioservant once charged with translating human prisoners during the siege of Orion's Breath. Officially terminated. Disavowed. But Dominion memory was imperfect, and traitors had long half-lives. The record Zune found listed Alseth's name in 5 dialects, each one linked to a different battlefield. None matched the version they now summoned. Alseth arrived inside a decayed envoy shell, a cyst-shaped carrier stitched from obsolete chitin, trailing spores and junk code flags. His hull displayed no rank, just a carved orbital glyph, exile. Its drive wake reeked of decomposed navigational instincts and burnt mycelial charting. It docked in silence. The hangar was sterilized. Gravity adjusted to match Dominion vector norms. Atmospheric filters pulsed with rotating viral inhibitors, scrubbed clean every 2 seconds. Zune stood behind a layered bulkhead, eyes trained on the bioform's every twitch. Cade shadowed the approach bay with 2 grav lances. Vega watched from medbay, already calibrating antiviral filters in case the envoy bled. Voss met it in person. Alseth emerged without ceremony. Its form was humanoid, but melted, armored plates overgrown with moss-thin neural tissue, spinal ridges distended into fractal protrusions. Its breath came hot and damp, reeking of decaying protein and pheromone oil. The face was split into thirds, each section twitching with separate micro-movements. When it spoke, the voice came through a modulation bladder grafted to its throat, a blend of vowel mimicry and wet friction. I remember your species, it said. You destroy what you fear. Voss didn't argue. She stood without armor, bearing only her sidearm and an obsolete combat insignia, one Alseth would recognize. I fear what you build and abandon, she replied. The envoy's shoulders shivered, a gesture that might have been amusement or contempt. They spoke for 97 minutes. Most of it was posturing. Cross-species rhythms forced both sides to wait for translation uplinks and neural soft-lag to resolve. Alseth communicated in layers, verbal, hormonal, posture-based, and photonic glands along its chest. Voss replied with calibrated stillness. Each word was an incision, each silence a scalpel. Zune monitored the exchange from behind the glass. Her implants recorded heat differentials in Alseth's shoulder bloom, indicators of pre-aggression or biochemical memory access. None activated. What Voss offered was not alliance. It was a promise. Destroy the reborn matron before the Accord and the Dominion found her. Cleanse the breach. Bury the betrayal. She did not promise mercy. She did not promise survival. Only that the creature growing in silence would not live long enough to awaken its mind. Alseth listened and remembered. I saw what she was, it said. Before she was born, she did not look at me with hunger. She looked with recognition. Your Accord thinks it can sculpt queens. It does not know how to bury them. Voss stepped closer. Her throat felt tight. Can you get us in? The envoy exhaled through its collar vents. If you go there, you will die, it said. But she may remember you before she kills you. That may be enough. A pause. Then its third mouth twitched slightly, a stuttering contraction. Not laughter, something colder. I have seen what happens when species try to silence their futures. Sometimes, your screams echo longer than their songs. Coordinates transmitted. An entry corridor traced in fold space. Not a direct path, but a bleed line through old Dominion grav burns, fractures carved during the siege of the Miriel unfolding. A forgotten scar. The corridor would last 9 hours. Zune replayed the envoy's parting glance for days. Not for what it said, but for what it didn't. The look of a creature who had once translated screams into data, and still remembered the pitch of the human voice at its breaking point. In the command cradle later, Cade stared at the NAV map and whispered, "Even the monsters are afraid of her." No one answered. Bellum adjusted course. The Tyrant Breaker turned into the rift and burned toward the Warship. The corridor opened. 9 hours of compression burn carried the Tyrant Breaker through fractured Dominion space, its hull grating against the debris field of forgotten wars. Navigation was tactile, Bellum red currents in the distortion like nerve pulses. Every microshift in fold space registered not as coordinates, but as sensation. It was like threading through scar tissue carved into spacetime. The ship's mass displaced radiation shadows older than recorded history. Gravitational anomalies screamed in absolute silence. Zune's implants buzzed every hour in arrhythmic pulses, a reaction she couldn't filter. Cade bled from the nose twice. Vega passed out once from low-oxygen hallucinations. No one spoke about it. They emerged into silence. A dwarf star, long bled of heat, spun in slow convulsion at the system's edge. Its gravity well still breathed, dragging fragments of its lost planets into lopsided orbits. Around the dead sun drifted planetary husks, scorched clean by solar collapse, tectonic plates locked in midrift like planets that died mid-birth. In close orbit spun a cradle, an artificial shell where no structure should be. It wrapped the sun in segments, hexagonal plating spiraling in irregular rhythm like pieces of armor forging themselves in real time. Light from the dying star bounced off its surface in scattered, uneven bursts. The Warship, Dominion spores drifted in the stellar tide. Living matter, some ancient, some new. Zune caught at least 2 sequences in the drift that matched Accord biocoding, fragments of her past embedded in the biology of the void. She said nothing. Voss stood at the prow silent. The others joined her one by one. No one spoke. The construct had no signal, no thermal bloom, no radiation signature. But Bellum confirmed its shape, biostructural consistency with the Accord's matron engineering file from the mirror. Accord genetics mapped into Dominion scaffolding. Intent woven into evolution. Inside those plates, something gestated. Cade exhaled. No defenses. Zune shook her head. There don't need to be. They descended into orbit. Bellum kept them veiled, emissionless, magnetically null, bleeding heat into void dispersal skins. Even the ship's mass signature was folded into low-noise scatter fields. A hangar opened on the shell. It did not signal. No targeting grid. No sensor sweep. It simply opened. They went in. The interior was not space. It was tissue. Walls of fiber and wet gel membrane flexed with biomechanical rhythm. The air shimmered faintly with moisture and charge. Organic veins pulsed through the walls, carrying nutrient fluid in visible circuits. The ship entered a throat. The hangar sealed behind them. No alarms. No resistance. The landing platform was bone lattice, reinforced with what resembled glass cartilage. Capillaries curled through its structure, reacting to their footsteps with faint pulses of light. Voss led the team out in full combat rig. Armor sealed. Weapons charged. No one raised a barrel. Gravity shifted as they moved. The structure adjusted to them, learning their gait, syncing to their respiration rates. Cade's HUD flickered once. Zune's helmet camera stuttered and then realigned with her neural pattern. Vega's suit remained static, but his skin crawled inside it. Only one passage forward. A corridor of smooth cartilage extended ahead, curving downward in a spiral. The light changed every 20 meters. First a soft white, then a deep crimson, then a color with no verbal analog that bent around their eyes like a question unanswered. They passed through fields of data light, floating glyphs rendered in Accord syntax, flickering as Zune looked at them. Not instructions. Memories. Personal. Some of them hers. Childhood fragments. Training logs. Neural imprints she'd buried after the Red-Hold infiltration. This isn't an archive, she said. It's an inheritance. The data flowed into the walls as they passed. Not recording, absorbing. At the corridor's end, the passage opened. The chamber was vast. Red light pulsed from fluid ducts in the floor. The air was warm, damp, electric. The smell of birth fluid and ozone clung to everything. Towering above them, suspended in hydrostatic gel, hung a shape. Humanoid, incomplete. The matron, 3 meters tall, spine crowned with crystalline antennae. Her form was a convergence, a chord symmetry shaped by dominion asymmetry. Her limbs were long, unnaturally so, with joint points that could flex in both directions. No armor, no weapon. The body bore a birthing seal across its sternum. A chord made, Zune confirmed silently. But her eyes were open, and it watched. It did not blink. It did not move. Zune stepped forward. Her implants triggered an echo. The air shimmered around her like thin ice under pressure. The matron spoke without voice. Not words, memory. A cascade of images. A chord ship's birthing code across the void. Dominion thralls kneeling, silent. A chamber fracturing beneath mirror light. A child's eye watching behind synthetic fluid. The sensation of teeth without mouths. The ache of waiting. Then, a sun breaking apart into strands of DNA. A cradled world imploding in reverse. Voss staggered. Cade fell to one knee, clutching his helmet. Vega screamed once, then bit down hard enough to break his lower molar. Zune remained standing, but swayed. Her heart raced. Panic surfaced. What if I belonged to her? The matron watched. It was not hostile. It was aware. And it wanted to know. Bellum systems fluttered. A single status blink on the command deck. Gravitic pressure increase. Internal inquiry suspended. No alarms. Just the ship choosing silence. The gel ruptured. Fluid spilled across the chamber in slow wavelets, folding into drain paths that hadn't existed seconds before. The temperature rose by 7 degrees. The light dimmed. The matron stepped from the tank. No sound. No threat. Her feet touched down. Voss raised her weapon. Her hand didn't move. She could kill it. She didn't. Zune fell to one knee. Not in worship. In fear. The matron looked at her. And remembered. Zune's mind collapsed inward. She saw herself, not as she was, but as she had been when altered. During the Mirror Protocol. When Nova Script was burned into her hippocampus. When Accord scientists whispered code phrases while she slept. The matron saw it all. A shared creation. A sibling. The chamber darkened. The matron opened her mouth. And spoke. Not in language. In truth. The humans couldn't understand it. But Zune did. She wept. Voss stood still. The matron took another step. Then another. And stopped. The message hung in the air, echoing off the wet walls. Zune wiped her face. She knows what she is, she whispered. The matron raised her hand. A pulse of energy, soft, harmonic, resonant, passed over the team. Not an attack, a goodbye. Then the chamber began to change. The floor rose. The walls contracted. The environment collapsed in reverse growth. The matron turned and walked into the dark, toward the star, toward birth. No one followed. Voss gave one command. Out. The Tyrant Breaker lifted free of the shell 10 minutes later. They did not speak until they broke system orbit. Even then, no one had the words. Not yet. 17 hours after the encounter in the womb star, the Tyrant Breaker held silent over the gas-shrouded world of Meskith 9. The planet below churned with storm belts kilometers thick. Lightning cracked across its equator, flashing momentary illumination over black ammonia clouds and swirling sulfur cyclones. The upper atmosphere registered as breathable for less than 90 seconds at a time, but no life stirred beneath. Meskith 9 had been stripped bare during the Third Accord Schism. A fuel mining world turned to slag by both sides before either could win. From orbit, the planet looked like it was breathing deep, poisoned inhales through pale violet lungs. They had jumped blind, folding between interference bands with Bellum half-blinded and Zune unconscious in the medbay. The rout had cost them gravimetric shielding. One of the aft relays remained misaligned. Engineers couldn't access the housing without risking depressurization. Bellum's voice had dimmed since their escape. Not silent, but muted. Zune's vitals were stable. Her mind was not. Neural spikes bloomed along all three cortical plates, language centers, memory paths, and the accord-burned substrate now lit like a storm. The monitors read her brain activity in waves of deep red and violet. Vega stood beside her bed, watching the pulse lines dance without pattern. No sedative worked. She had not spoken since the matron's final pulse. Voss had not left the bridge. Outside, the planet spun in oily silence. A Dominion Scoutbinder patrol had passed through 6 hours earlier. It hadn't lingered. The Tyrant Breaker remained cold, cloaked, and still. In the shadow of the gas giant's moons, they were invisible. But not safe. Below, the storm moved like breath. Bellum flagged a low-level magnetic anomaly surging from Meskith 9's core. A solar tether forming, short-lived, unstable. No threat yet. But soon. Zune woke screaming. 3 decks below, med sensors flared. Vega was already moving, reflexes honed from months of crisis. He activated restraint fields, then canceled them when he saw her. Zune sat upright. Her breathing was slow. Too slow. She looked directly at him and said one word. Split. She was calm. Her eyes weren't hers. Vega stepped back. He didn't draw a weapon. Not yet. Instead, he tapped his wrist and sent a silent priority signal to the bridge. In the war room, Cade tracked 10 new signal traces, crimson spore lattices converging toward the womb star. The trajectories were irregular, but precise. Hive-laced, but not chaotic. These weren't blind spawn. They were responding, converging. No matron should be broadcasting, he muttered. No matron should invite. But one was. Bellum cross-referenced the pattern with legacy Nova data. It matched partially with Accord diplomacy beacon protocol. A language not of words, but of structure. Formation. A call to converge and witness. Zune walked onto the command deck barefoot, still in a pressure sheath. She ignored the crew. Her steps were slow, deliberate. Her pupils were fully dilated. The shimmer behind her iris showed the same waveform as the matron's broadcast. Voss didn't stop her. The truth didn't end, Zune said. It duplicated. Cade stood, tense. Zune, whatever she showed you, she didn't show me. She shared me. Part of me is there now. Part of her is here. What is she doing? Vega asked from the entrance. She's mirroring, Zune replied. She knows how the accord ends. She's rewriting the beginning, building a new shape from broken code. One that doesn't need to choose between war and extinction. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief. It was understanding. Bellum pulsed a new warning. 5 vessels entering the system rim. Not military class. Spore transports. Gene couriers. Observers. Non-attack posture. Listening. Scouting. Reacting. Voss paced to the forward display. Her reflection moved across the glass like a ghost. The ships weren't hunting. They're not here for us, Cade whispered. They're waiting for her. Bellum pinged again, low priority. An encoded signal had begun broadcasting from the womb star's core. Contained no data, no threat indicator. Only one directive. Assemble. Zune turned. She's not finished growing, she said. But she's no longer alone. Her mind, Voss asked, fractured, expanding, like a tree splitting open at the root. Every branch a new thought. What happens if we wait? Zune stared at the swirling planet below. Then she becomes something no one can kill. Bellum's tones sharpened. Second wave detected. Inbound. Mass unknown. Time to arrival. 4.6 hours. High-risk trajectory crossing. Vega said it quietly. If they get here first, we lose the sky. Whatever she becomes, we won't get a second chance. Voss said nothing. She watched the storm rise over Meskith's surface. Lightning crawled across the cloud belt like veins. Beneath the weight of it all, her shoulders tensed. The breath she took felt like the last one before a trigger pull. No orders. No motion. The fracture point had come. The decision the entire war had spiraled toward, humanity's final vote between control and surrender, extinction and evolution. Zune walked beside her. She didn't plead. "You have to decide," she said. "Do we kill her before she finishes? Or do we ask what she becomes?" Voss closed her eyes. Her jaw clenched. Every war she'd fought led here, and every instinct in her now screamed both yes and no. She opened her mouth and made her choice. The fracture point had come. The Tyrant Breaker burned its engines one final time, vectoring toward the womb star. Voss had chosen. No strike, no preemptive execution, no trigger pulled. Instead, approach, observe, allow. The main drive roared to life as Bellum rerouted the reactor stack into full impulse thrust. Thermal baffles peeled open. Heat signatures bloomed like a flare in the dark. Every sensor in system would see them now. There was no going back to silence. For the first time since the siege of Drekel Prime, the warship flew with its full identity exposed. The Dominion watchers did not fire. Spore carriers drifted in complex orbits, cautious, not passive. Their hulls reflected starlight in fractured bands of color, like oil slicks cast in motion. Long antennae bristled across their dorsal ridges, constantly adjusting, refracting low-band pulses. They watched the Tyrant Breaker descend, tracking heat trails and magnetic curl, as if sensing whether this human vessel would become part of the pattern or fracture it. Inside the command cradle, Voss said nothing. She stood at the forward rail, helmet sealed, visor retracted. Behind her, Vega ran silent biometric tracking, constantly checking for irregularities in Zune's neural signature. Cade sat at the helm, one hand resting on the throttle without moving it, his knuckles white, his breathing shallow. Bellum did not speak. The ship had accepted its course. The hangar opened again. The same throat, the same chamber, but it was no longer the same. The organic corridor had widened. Walls once pulsing with flesh tide now shimmered with hexagonal scales of flexible alloy, their surface covered in floating glyphs, accord languages layered over Dominion latticework, strobing in recursive spirals. Each symbol represented more than a word. Some were memory, some were questions. Others were simply light. The chamber floor had changed texture, like wet obsidian cut with veins of amber and soft violet. The air shimmered with charge, the temperature warmer than human comfort, but not hostile. The tank was empty. The matron was not. She waited, standing at the base of the starcore spine, draped in bio-woven material that flickered between clothed and exoskeletal. Her feet no longer left damp traces. Her limbs were less angular. The asymmetry of her skeletal frame had smoothed, accord symmetry asserting itself beneath Dominion birth. She had formed intention. Her hands bore no weapon. Her posture was open, her expression unreadable, but not dead. As Zune stepped forward, the chamber dimmed slightly, the glyphs clustering tighter around the matron in slow orbit, almost like petals folding inward. Zune walked forward. No command was given. No permission needed. Her pressure sheath hissed open at the collar as she stepped into the chamber. Her breath quickened, not from fear, but from recognition. Each step forward synchronized the rhythm of her pulse with the glyph light. The air around her grew brighter, softer. The chamber responded. The others remained at the threshold. Voss lowered her rifle but didn't release it. Vega's heart rate climbed. Cade's visor readout froze momentarily, then recalibrated. Zune stopped 1 meter from the matron. Neither bowed, neither flinched. For a moment, nothing moved. Then a burst of light filled the chamber. Not sound, not language, a resonance. It pulsed through the floor, up their legs, into their teeth and lungs. It struck every implant, every synthetic node, every organic nerve. The signal wasn't a command. It wasn't a thought. It was a request. Images unfolded, not broadcasted, but felt. Humans standing atop burning colonies, bloodied but unbroken. Children carried on backs across black sand. Every muscle aching, every mind still calculating. Dominion bruteships torn apart by children born immune to hive bonding. Genetic disobedience coded from love, not rebellion. Accord treaties reconfigured as questions. Their fine print overwritten with living glyphs. Legal documents that grew. The matron's own face, replicated across 1,000 timelines. In some, she ruled. In others, she burned. In none did she remain still. Zune felt every thread burn across her cortex. Her spinal ports flared, not with pain but with clarity. "She's asking us," Zune whispered, "to imagine her." Voss took one step forward. Her voice was low. "Why?" Zune turned. "Because the Accord created her to be an executioner. The Dominion shaped her to be a queen. And she has chosen neither." Outside, Dominion ships shifted formation. They circled, not with precision, but with curiosity. No weapons locked. No targeting lattices unfolded. It was a vigil, not an ambush. The matron raised one hand. A field of light erupted around her. A mesh of logic symbols suspended in harmonic strands. The humans saw history reconfigured, not rewritten, but reweighted. Certain decisions replayed. Certain timelines thinned. Others fattened. Cade flinched. "She's showing probabilities." "No," Zune said. "She's asking us to define them, to choose which future becomes true. She wants to become what we believe she might be." Voss stared at the matron. Her heart pounded not with fear, but with pressure. The kind that precedes a gunshot, a surrender, or a prayer. What if she says nothing? What if the silence leaves the matron to fill the void with something worse? The air trembled with potential. Glyphs pulsed at the edge of her vision. The weapon had not been fired. The chamber had not collapsed. The ships outside had not closed. Not yet. Inside the Warship, something older than war held its breath, and waited to be defined. The moment stretched. In the chamber, beneath the coils of logic light and the breathless weight of possibility, no one moved. The matron stood like a fixed point in history that had not yet happened. Zune stood before her, a daughter of two extinct empires, trembling beneath futures not yet chosen. Voss stood at the threshold, weapon in hand, vision clouded by timelines converging on her breath. Then the chamber answered. Not the matron. The structure. Light flowed backward across the glyphs. Harmonics inverted. The chamber's floor softened beneath their feet, folding into concentric spirals like memory distilling into action. Bellum's external sensors registered gravitational interference and internal spatial dilation, not weaponized, but reactive. The structure was reshaping itself in response to indecision. The Warship was listening. Outside, Dominion ships shifted. Some aligned along equatorial anchor nodes of the shell. Others scattered into new orbital configurations as if responding to unseen signal logic. At least one vessel disengaged from the system entirely, folding out with a soundless burst of quantum recoil, leaving behind an echolattice, a pulse of intent wrapped in radiation shimmer. Bellum logged it without translation. No attempt made. A new shape was forming in the void. Zune blinked. Her lips parted as if to speak, but she said nothing. Her breath frosted in the sudden shift of air pressure. The matron tilted her head. Not as a predator studies prey, but as a sculptor examines stone. Then spoke. One sound. Not syllable, not mimicry. A resonant pulse mapped to a human phoneme, not in form, but in meaning. It hit the skull behind the eyes, sank into the marrow, and expanded like heat in cold bone. Voss heard it, and knew it meant, show me. So she did. She removed her helmet. Dropped it to the floor. The echo it made was devoured by the living walls. And walked forward. Her steps triggered no alarms, no glyph pulses, no reaction from the matron. But the chamber shimmered again. Memory scaffolds lifted behind her, ribbons of energy forming tableaus in soft projection. The siege of Drekel Prime played in reverse, collapse turning to structure, blood draining back into wounds, walls rising where ash once drifted. A war court tribunal where Voss had sat in silence as 38 Accord prisoners were sentenced to cognitive erasure. She'd signed off with a biomark. No appeal. A child's scream in a collapsed escape pod during the evacuation of HFY Minor. She hadn't reached them in time. The scream had stayed in her mind for 22 years. Each memory played without embellishment. No judgment. No absolution. Just wait. The matron didn't recoil. She simply watched. Zune stepped aside, eyes on Voss now. Her voice was steady. She doesn't want to read us. She wants to be read into us. Voss hesitated. This was not surrender. Not alliance. This was reflection, a moment to decide what came next, not for the galaxy, but for the self. The matron extended her hand. No threat. No demand. Just invitation. And Voss, without ceremony, reached back. The contact wasn't heat or light. It wasn't vibration or sound. It was pattern, the kind that changed not what you knew, but how you process knowing. Her mind expanded sideways. Thought curved inward. Language became scaffold. Regret became shape. She saw herself from above, then from before, then from after. And she remained. Outside, the Dominion ship sang. Bellum recorded harmonic emissions across 5 bands, 3 organic, 1 structural, 1 unknown. Not music. Not message. A shared interval of recognition. The sound wasn't heard. It was felt in chest cavities, in molars, in the tension behind the eyes. Even without understanding, the crew knew this was acknowledgement. Not a victory, not of surrender, just existence. And acceptance. The Warship awoke. The outer shell reconfigured itself into spiral tessellations. Hex plates folded inward and outward in alternating pulse. The core sphere beneath the matron's feet glowed with a steady bioluminescence. Beneath their boots, the chamber grew cooler, then still. Cade knelt. He didn't know why. He wasn't afraid. Just aligned. Something about the harmonic convergence reminded him of standing outside the ruins of Vassalgate, listening to children hum to themselves after the siege. Vega stood at the threshold, both hands shaking. He looked at Voss, not with confusion, but with permission. He thought of the oath he'd sworn back in Rehold, do no harm unless silence would do more. She nodded once. Zune closed her eyes. The last time she had felt this still was inside the mirror. But the stillness then had been like drowning. This was different. This was breathing. The chamber quieted. The light settled. And then, as if the moment had decided to remember itself, the chamber pulsed. A single glyph unfolded above the matron's head. A chord syntax. 2 characters. Not static. They shimmered like fluid geometry, folding through mathematical impossibilities. Every crew member saw something different in its shape, a promise, a door, a hand reaching across time. Untranslated. Untranslatable. Bellum logged it as a new linguistic root class. Zune translated by instinct. She whispered, "Welcome." The glyph dissolved. And the future broke open, not with fire, but with trust. For the first time in 1,000 years, the accord began again, not in code, or treaty, or doctrine, but in choice. For days later, the Tyrant Breaker hovered above an unmarked world once held in secrecy by the accord. It was not a return. There was nothing to return to. Below, the surface bore scars of decommissioned memory farms, vast fields where synthroot servers had once stretched across the high plateaus like moss-fed forests. Now they lay in ruin, collapsed in spirals of carbon ash and fractured silica. Mnemonic trees, once humming with cognitive residue, now twisted toward the sky in dead silence. Their bark had been etched with data streams that no longer glowed. Bellum registered active geothermal motion below the crust, evidence of recent detonations. Some were controlled. Others weren't. During the collapse, the Accord had purged its deep archives by burying them beneath kinetic fusion strikes. No one had stayed to see what survived. 32 former registry nodes were identified. None were functional. The Tyrant Breaker kept low orbit. Its engines thrummed at minimal output. Cloak inactive. Weapons offline. It had become a monument more than a ship. Above, the Dominion ships still drifted, not as predators, not as invaders, but as witnesses. Their configurations had changed over the days. Each day, a new symmetry formed, first orbital triangles, then slow radial expansion, then a concentric folding. Zune theorized they were waiting for a language to finish forming. Not words, but geometry. No message had been sent. No threat given. The matron had not left the Warship, nor had she called. And still, they waited. Voss stood in the primary cradle, watching the world turn beneath them. Her armor was gone. She wore only command blacks, now fabric, not plating. Her sidearm had not been reissued. Her hands were bare. Every day she came to the cradle and said nothing. She watched the wreckage. She counted the scars. Vega stood beside her. His uniform unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up. He said little. He slept less. His reports were brief, nothing new. No conflict. No injuries. Crew stress at manageable levels. Unspoken, everyone was unraveling in the quiet. Cade dozed in the chair behind them, half-strapped into his station. Sleep cycles had shifted. He moved like a man outside time, unmoored from duty, not because he had abandoned it, but because it had nothing left to give. When he opened his eyes, he didn't speak. Just stared at the Dominion spiral as if expecting it to speak back. Zune had not spoken since the glyph. She sat in isolation, surrounded by echo maps of what the matron had not said, permutations of silence traced across 1,000 branching futures. The glyphs projected into her space now were different. rotating, fragmenting, rejoining in ways even Bellum couldn't fully model. They were not language. Not yet. She traced them with her eyes. Sometimes her hands. Never her voice. Her pulse was steady. Her thoughts private. But today something inside her trembled. And the war? The war had stopped. Across Crimson Dominion space, signal density had dropped by 87%. No new deployments. No genetic harvesting. Hivecore activity was idle. Pulse data streamed like breath through sleeping lungs. Accord holdouts had gone dark. Entire satellite systems had switched to passive orbital drift. Maintenance beacons blinked into standby mode. The last known Accord Strike Command, a rogue formation in the Ocean Ring, had turned its ships toward deep orbit and powered down. No new battles. No new claims. The galaxy had not made peace. It had paused, as if waiting. On the fifth day, Bellum reported a signal. It arrived without announcement. No header. No packet structure. It emerged like a breath pushed into vacuum, threading through resonance and static until it passed through the Tyrant Breaker's low-band array. Not a broadcast. Not a directive. A question. 12 tones. 13 seconds. Matron syntax. Dominion cadence. Accord structure. The tones formed a spiral pattern in the ship's visual processors. Not linear. Not decoded. They folded inward and then back out like thought approaching and then retreating. Zune stood. She walked to the bridge without request. No one stopped her. When she entered, the crew stepped back. Her eyes no longer glowed. Her spine no longer stiffened under signal load. She looked human. She listened to the signal. Translated it aloud. "Are you still here?" The words weren't mournful. They weren't afraid. They were curious. Voss stepped forward. Not quickly, but with decision. She didn't need a ship. She didn't need a council. She stood at the cradle and whispered. "We never left." Bellum logged the response. It transmitted without encryption. No routing. No framing. Just voice. The signal ended. No reply came. The crew stood motionless. Zune exhaled. But this time her eyes closed as if in prayer. Vega closed his eyes too, then opened them slowly. "This is what endings sound like," he said quietly. Bellum pulsed once, a single diagnostic ripple, then silence. As if the ship too had nothing left to say. But the Warship brightened. Its inner plates unfolded fractionally, catching starlight in new vectors. Its orbit adjusted half a degree, enough to cause light from the dead world below to refract upward like a mirrored sunrise. The Dominion ships changed formation again, this time into a fractal spiral, mimicking the signal's harmonic curve. Their motion was slow, graceful. Not confirmation. Not communication. Just agreement. And for the first time since the war began, across 7 species, 5 empires, and 1 million dead. No one spoke. No one fired. The galaxy listened. And in the silence that followed, a new future began.